Private Jessica Monroe had always known that joining the Army would test her limits, but nothing could have prepared her for the intensity of Fort Benning. The sun had just begun to rise over the sprawling training grounds, casting long shadows over the obstacle courses and firing ranges. The air was thick with the smell of sweat, gunpowder, and freshly turned dirt, a scent she would come to associate with every waking hour of her life for the next several weeks. Jessica adjusted the straps on her rucksack nervously, feeling the weight of her rifle, boots, and uniform almost as heavily as the eyes of the veterans on the course. Every glance felt like an evaluation, a silent measurement of her worth, and so far, the verdict seemed clear. She didn't belong. The veterans were relentless. They moved with confidence, laughter, and mockery, tossing glances over their shoulders as Jessica struggled to navigate a rope climb. "Come on, rookie. You're going to be lunch for the dirt before noon," one shouted. Another veteran smirked, shaking his head as he completed the obstacle in a single fluid motion. Jessica's face burned with embarrassment, but she swallowed her frustration. She had been underestimated her entire life, and this was no different. Her mother had always told her that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the ability to act despite it. The memory of her father, who had died serving overseas, pulsed through her mind as she gritted her teeth and pulled herself over the top of the rope, landing awkwardly but upright. She could hear a few claps, faint and grudging, from other trainees who admired her resilience. That small acknowledgement fueled something deep inside her, determination, a spark of confidence she was only beginning to recognize. Jessica spent the evening alone in the barracks, reviewing maps and mission manuals, while the others joked and played cards. She traced her fingers over the valleys and ridges of the region where her first deployment would take place, noting the winding dirt roads and riverbeds that could easily become ambush points. Her mind worked like a machine, calculating every potential danger, every possible angle. Yet despite her meticulous attention, doubt lingered. She was just a trainee, inexperienced, often dismissed. What could she, a newcomer, possibly do in the chaos of real combat? Still, there was something different about this deployment, an intangible feeling that told her danger was lurking. It wasn't fear, not entirely, but a heightened awareness, a whisper in the back of her mind that something would be asked of her sooner than expected. She tried to shake the feeling as she lay on her bunk that night, staring at the ceiling. The sounds of distant artillery drills and helicopters overhead became a lullaby and a warning at the same time. Sleep came fitfully, filled with images of valleys choked with dust, vehicles overturned, and gunfire flashing in the desert sun. Morning came in a harsh, golden glare, and with it, reality. Jessica's convoy orders were clear: a routine escort of humanitarian supplies through a remote valley in Afghanistan. On paper, it was simple, but the region had earned a reputation for danger. As the trucks rumbled across the uneven terrain, dust swirling in the hot wind, Jessica rode in the last Humvee, eyes scanning the ridges for any sign of movement. Sergeant Cole, a veteran with years of combat experience etched into his stern face, barked instructions and dismissed her cautious observations with a flick of his hand. "You're new, rookie." Eyes wide open, mouth closed, he said, his voice rough but not unkind. Jessica bit back her retort, but internally she felt a fire ignite. She refused to be invisible. Her instincts told her something wasn't right. The dust and shadows seemed to shift unnaturally. Villagers along the route glanced at the convoy with unease, some hiding behind mud walls, others staring with blank faces. Jessica studied their movements, noting patterns that seemed inconsistent with normal life. Every instinct screamed caution, yet she kept it to herself, knowing that speaking up too forcefully would only invite ridicule. Hours passed in tense silence, the convoy crawling through the narrow pass. Jessica's heart pounded in sync with the uneven vibrations of the truck. She tried to ignore the gnawing anxiety, focusing instead on the drills she had memorized, the survival skills she had been taught. Yet every fiber of her being screamed that they were walking into a trap. The wind carried the scent of dust and something metallic, something that didn't belong. Her eyes caught a flash on the ridges, the glint of a reflective surface, possibly a sniper's scope, or worse. She leaned forward, fingers tightening around her rifle. "Something's not right," she murmured under her breath, though her voice was drowned by the hum of the convoy. Her mind raced, running through contingency plans, tactical maneuvers, escape routes, and cover points. Every scenario she had studied now had to be imagined in real life, with real consequences. The fear that had been an abstract concept during training now pulsed in her veins with raw urgency. Yet, even in her fear, Jessica found clarity. Training had taught her the mechanics, but instinct guided her perception. She remembered her father's advice, once spoken in a quiet moment before deployment. Courage isn't loud. It's quiet, sharp, and deliberate. Pay attention, trust your gut, and act. She drew a deep breath, letting the words anchor her. She may have been a trainee, dismissed by those around her, but she was not powerless. As the convoy reached the narrowest part of the valley, Jessica's pulse quickened. Shadows stretched across the terrain, and the uneven landscape created perfect ambush points. She could imagine enemy forces lying in wait, rifles trained, explosives primed. Every instinct screamed danger. Every nerve was alert. She dared a glance at Sergeant Cole, noting his confidence, but even the most experienced soldiers could be caught off guard. Her mind was now racing faster than ever, calculating, anticipating, preparing. For the first time, Jessica felt a strange mixture of fear and exhilaration. Fear because she was stepping into the unknown, where mistakes could be fatal. Exhilaration because she knew that this moment would define her, a moment where training, instinct, and courage would collide. She adjusted her grip on her rifle and whispered to herself, almost like a mantra, "I will be ready." The sun climbed higher, casting blinding light across the pass. Dust swirled in the wind like phantom signals, and the stillness of the valley became oppressive, almost sentient. Jessica's eyes flicked from ridge to ridge, picking up patterns that no one else seemed to notice. She couldn't explain why, but a profound certainty settled over her. This would be the test that would separate her from the others. Her training, her observation, and her courage would be the only things between survival and disaster. As the convoy entered the heart of the valley, Jessica took a deep breath and steadied herself. The moment had arrived, though she didn't yet know it. She was a trainee, underestimated and overlooked. But beneath that exterior was a mind sharp as a blade and a heart that refused to yield. Today, the valley would demand everything from her, and she would have to answer in ways she had never imagined. And somewhere in the shadows above, unseen by the convoy, the enemy waited. The first ambush, the first blast, the first test of courage was only moments away. The convoy rumbled onward, the sun now high above the jagged ridges of the Afghan valley, casting harsh light over the dusty landscape. The dirt road twisted like a snake through the terrain, flanked on either side by rocky outcrops and sparse vegetation. Jessica Monroe sat in the last Humvee, her hands gripping the edge of the seat, rifle resting across her lap. Every muscle in her body was taut, every sense heightened. The wind whipped through the vehicle, carrying dust that stung her eyes and coated her skin with grit. The heat was suffocating, but Jessica barely noticed. It was the tension, the subtle shift in the atmosphere that made her sweat. Sergeant Cole rode in the lead vehicle, scanning the horizon with a practiced eye. He barked commands into the radio, his voice cutting through the dry, dusty air. Around him, soldiers laughed and joked, masking the undercurrent of unease that gripped even the most seasoned veterans. Jessica noticed it, the way hands hovered over rifles a fraction too tightly, the way eyes flicked repeatedly to the ridgelines. Her instincts screamed that something was off, but she remained silent. She was just a trainee. No one would take her seriously. Still, she kept her eyes moving, her mind calculating. The villagers they passed along the route were quiet, some staring at the convoy with wary eyes, others retreating behind crumbling mud walls. One small boy darted from an alley, stopping abruptly to watch them go. Jessica's gaze lingered on the child for a moment longer than necessary, noticing his expression fear mixed with an odd knowing, as if he had seen this before. She shivered, a chill despite the desert heat. These small details, insignificant to most, planted a seed of unease deep in her mind. Patterns in the terrain, the villagers' cautious glances, the unnatural stillness, it all pointed to a trap, though she had no proof. Hours passed, each mile through the valley, amplifying the sense of impending danger. The convoy's vehicles kicked up clouds of dust, choking the air and making visibility difficult. Jessica's eyes darted from ridge to ridge, catching every glint of metal, every shadow that moved against the rocks. She noticed a line of shrubs that seemed out of place, a dip in the ground where the dirt looked freshly disturbed. Her heart beat faster, but she forced herself to breathe steadily, reviewing the tactical maneuvers she had memorized during months of training. Each thought was deliberate, precise. She refused to let fear cloud her judgment. "Rookie, keep your head down and your mouth shut," Sergeant Cole muttered when their Humvee slowed to allow a supply truck to navigate a rough patch. His tone was not harsh, but there was an edge, a reminder of her place in this unit. Jessica nodded, swallowing the warning that had risen to her lips. She couldn't risk being dismissed, couldn't risk undermining her credibility. Yet inside, every nerve screamed at her to act, to alert someone to the anomalies she had observed. She studied the maps again, tracing the roads and identifying potential escape routes in her mind. She had to be ready. The convoy entered a narrower section of the pass, the walls of rock closing in like a trap. Jessica's pulse quickened. She could see small alcoves and crevices that would make perfect sniper nests. The heat shimmered off the rocks, creating mirages that made the terrain appear to shift and move. Every instinct screamed that they were walking into a perfect ambush zone. She shifted slightly in her seat, tightening her grip on the rifle. "Eyes on the ridges," she whispered to herself. Her voice was barely audible over the hum of the engines, but it was a mantra, a way to focus her mind. She studied the line of rocks on the left, noting how shadows fell and shifted. A glint caught her eye metal? A reflection from a weapon? Her stomach churned. She scanned the right side, the valley walls, the small outcrops. Nothing moved yet, but the tension was palpable. She could feel it in her bones. The soldiers around her continued to joke and chatter, oblivious or perhaps unwilling to acknowledge the danger. Corporal Rivera, riding beside her in the Humvee, shot a glance at Jessica. There was a silent understanding, a recognition that her observation skills were sharp, though neither of them spoke of it openly. Rivera had been her unofficial mentor since training began, quietly guiding her, silently offering reassurance. Today, his presence was comforting, even as the unease in the valley pressed down on them like a physical weight. Time stretched unnaturally as the convoy moved deeper into the pass. The hum of engines, the crunch of tires over gravel, the distant cries of animals, everything seemed amplified. Jessica's eyes darted constantly, scanning for movement, listening for anomalies. Her mind mapped potential threats, escape routes, and fallback positions. Each observation was stored, cataloged, and analyzed in milliseconds. She had trained for this, but real combat had a rhythm all its own, and Jessica was learning to anticipate it. A sudden movement on the ridge to the left made her flinch. Something had shifted a shadow, perhaps a rock kicked loose. Her heart pounded violently in her chest. She leaned slightly forward, trying to focus despite the heat and dust. Her mind raced through possibilities. Sniper, ambush, decoy. Her hand tightened around her rifle. She could feel sweat trickling down her back, but she didn't dare wipe it away. In her mind, every second counted. Hesitation could be fatal. She wanted to speak, to warn the convoy, but she hesitated. Speaking up as a trainee could lead to dismissal or ridicule. Yet staying silent gnawed at her, a tension she could not ignore. She weighed the risk, calculated the angles, and prepared herself. Deep down, Jessica knew that whether anyone listened or not, she had to be ready to act. The convoy slowed as the terrain became more treacherous, rocks and uneven ground, forcing vehicles to navigate carefully. Jessica's eyes caught another movement. This time on the right rose a figure crouched, still, almost blending with the environment. Her heart skipped a beat. She adjusted her rifle instinctively, her body reacting faster than her mind could process. The sense of imminent danger was undeniable now. A voice from the radio broke the tension briefly. Sergeant Cole, giving routine instructions, but Jessica barely heard it. Her focus was total. She reviewed escape routes in her head, noting the dry creek bed that ran along the left side of the pass. If the ambush came, that path might be their only chance. She memorized every obstacle, every ridge, every crevice where the enemy could hide. Every instinct told her that this was no ordinary convoy, no ordinary valley. As the Humvee crested a slight rise, the valley opened slightly, revealing the perfect kill zone. Jessica's pulse raced. She could see down the narrow corridor where vehicles were forced to slow, vulnerable to attack from above. She inhaled sharply, steeling herself. Today, she was a trainee, underestimated and overlooked. But deep inside, something had shifted. She was ready, whether anyone believed in her or not. And then, for a fleeting moment, the world held its breath. The wind whispered through the rocks. The dust swirled unnaturally. Jessica's fingers tightened on her rifle. She didn't yet know when, where, or how the ambush would begin, but she knew it was coming. Every detail she had observed, every instinct she had honed, would be tested. And when the first explosion ripped through the valley, Jessica Monroe would be the only one ready to act. The valley held its breath. The sun was a harsh glare on jagged rocks, but beneath its heat lay shadows darker than the day itself. Jessica Monroe's hands tightened around her rifle, as her instincts screamed that the moment they had all feared had arrived. The convoy creaked forward, every wheel crunching gravel in the stillness. Then, without warning, it happened. A deafening explosion rocked the convoy. The lead Humvee's tires burst, flipping it onto its side with a terrifying screech. Smoke and dust filled the air, choking the soldiers and turning the narrow valley into a haze of confusion. Gunfire erupted from the ridges on both sides. Bullets ricocheted off rocks, pinging the vehicles like angry hail. Soldiers screamed, ducked, and returned fire wherever they could, but the chaos was overwhelming. Jessica dove under the dashboard, heart hammering, ears ringing. Every training scenario she had memorized flashed through her mind at once, but this was real, far more brutal, far more chaotic. She could see Sergeant Cole crawling behind the lead Humvee, clutching his side where he had been grazed by shrapnel. Rivera shouted something, though Jessica barely heard him over the cacophony of explosions, gunfire, and the roar of the wind whipping through the pass. Instinct took over. Jessica's fear did not paralyze her. It sharpened her senses. She peeked over the edge of the Humvee's armor and identified the ridges from which the attackers were firing. Small alcoves, rock formations, natural cover, each one now a deadly threat. She calculated angles, distances, and the sequence of enemy fire, mapping the ambush in her mind in real time. "Everyone get down. Stay behind cover," she shouted, her voice cutting through the noise like steel. The words surprised her, even as they left her lips. Her team looked at her, wide-eyed. The trainee was giving orders. Jessica's eyes flicked to Cole, seeing him nod ever so slightly, as if acknowledging that the only way they might survive was to follow her lead. A rocket-propelled grenade slammed into the second Humvee, sending it rolling onto its side and igniting a plume of smoke and fire. Jessica threw herself to the ground, her training guiding every move. She crawled under the smoke, keeping low, scanning the ridges for any sign of a safe path. The air was thick with heat, dust, and the acrid scent of explosives. She could see shadows moving on the rocks, enemy fighters taking advantage of the chaos. Her mind raced. She needed to create a diversion, to reduce their exposure. Grabbing a smoke grenade from her belt, she pulled the pin and lobbed it toward the ridge on the right. The thick white cloud billowed upward, momentarily obscuring enemy sight lines. Jessica barked directions at the other survivors, pointing them toward cover, toward the small depressions and ridges she had noted earlier. Then she saw it, a small group of enemy fighters attempting to flank the convoy from a higher ridge. Jessica assessed the distance, took a steady breath, and fired. Her first shot struck true, and the attackers faltered. The second followed, a precise kill that surprised even her. Fear still churned in her stomach, but it no longer controlled her. Every action was deliberate, every choice a calculation in survival. Crawling across exposed ground, Jessica reached the Humvee where Cole lay, grimacing in pain. She helped him drag himself behind cover, pressing a field dressing against his wound. Rivera was pinned down nearby, rifle aimed but unable to move without drawing fire. Jessica's gaze swept the battlefield again. Every soldier in her unit depended on her now. The weight of responsibility settled over her shoulders, heavier than her rucksack, heavier than the rifle in her hands. She quickly realized that the ambush was not random. The enemy had coordinated positions, controlled vantage points, and superior numbers. Jessica's brain worked feverishly, recalling her studies of previous ambushes and tactical manuals. There was one route, a narrow creek bed to the left of the valley. If the survivors could reach it, they might escape the deadly line of fire. But moving would be lethal. The ridge above was lined with enemy shooters, their rifles trained on every inch of the valley floor. Jessica scanned again, noting patterns in the enemy fire, brief pauses, the rhythm of their shots, their movements. Timing was everything. She called to Rivera, "On my mark, move to the creek. Don't hesitate. Trust me." The sound of another explosion split the air, and debris rained down around them. Jessica felt the sting of grit against her skin and the heat of shrapnel. She rolled over, firing as she moved, keeping the enemy suppressed, just long enough to allow the team to inch toward the relative safety of the creek bed. Every second was agony, every movement a gamble. The enemy began to notice the movement, their fire growing more concentrated. Jessica grabbed a jammed machine gun from a fallen vehicle, cleared it with trembling hands, and unleashed a hail of bullets toward a group of fighters advancing too close. Her team moved behind her, using the suppression to crawl forward. Sweat ran into her eyes, burning, but she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. Every instinct told her that hesitation meant death. Finally, the small group reached the creek bed, huddling behind the natural cover it offered. Jessica checked on each soldier, making sure they were intact, breathing, still alive. Cole gave her a look of disbelief. The rookie had taken control, orchestrated their survival, and kept everyone alive so far. Jessica allowed herself a brief exhale, but she didn't linger. The ambush was not yet over. The valley was far from safe, and she knew the enemy would regroup. Her mind moved to the next step. She had to turn the tide, not just survive. She recalled her studies of ambush patterns, realizing there was a command post somewhere above, a radio team coordinating the attack. If she could neutralize them, she could disrupt the ambush entirely. She signaled to the survivors, pointing to rocks for cover, then crawled toward the first ridge under the cover of smoke and debris. The climb was treacherous, every movement a test of courage and skill. Bullets whizzed past, kicking up dirt and stone. Jessica ignored the fear, knotting her stomach, focusing only on the task. Every calculated move brought her closer to the command post, closer to controlling the battlefield instead of being controlled by it. She felt the weight of responsibility heavier than ever. One misstep could cost everyone their lives. Finally, she reached a vantage point and spotted the radio team. With a steady hand, she eliminated the first threat, moving quickly to the next. The element of surprise was hers. The ambush began to falter as confusion spread among the attackers. Jessica had done the unthinkable. The trainee was no longer merely surviving. She was taking command, shaping the battlefield, fighting not just to live, but to save everyone around her. For the first time, Jessica allowed herself a thought she had buried since her first day at Fort Benning. I am capable. The air in the valley was thick with smoke, dust, and the acrid stench of burned metal. Explosions continued to echo from the ridges, rattling nerves and teeth alike. Amid the chaos, Private Jessica Monroe crouched behind a partially destroyed Humvee, her rifle clutched tightly, mind racing. Fear pulsed through her veins, but it was tempered by an unwavering clarity. Hesitation meant death. Every movement, every decision, was now measured not for herself, but for the survival of the soldiers around her. Sergeant Cole lay sprawled behind cover, groaning softly as he pressed a field dressing against the wound on his side. Rivera's eyes darted around the valley, scanning for threats, his rifle raised, but his confidence faltering. And the rest of the convoy survivors huddled close, unsure whether to trust the trainee or wait for a miracle. Jessica knew they needed leadership, and quickly. She had trained for months, memorized countless tactical maneuvers, and yet nothing could have prepared her for this moment. Yet instinctively, she began to take charge. "Listen to me," she shouted over the gunfire, voice cutting through the chaos. "We move in stages. Cover fire, then advance to the creek bed. Keep low, stay close to the rocks, and don't stop." The soldiers froze for a fraction of a second, stunned. Then, realizing there was no one else to lead, they followed directions. She pointed to natural cover, small depressions, rocky outcrops, debris from the overturned Humvees, and coordinated their movements with precision. Every second counted. Hesitation could be fatal. Jessica crawled forward, pressing her rifle to her shoulder, scanning the ridges for enemy positions. She spotted movement, a glint of metal from a sniper's scope, a shadow shifting behind rocks, and immediately assessed angles and trajectories. Using her limited training in cover and concealment, she fired, forcing the enemy to duck. Another soldier, emboldened by her calm decisiveness, joined her suppressive fire. The combination bought them time, a few critical seconds in a battlefield where seconds were life and death. She grabbed a jammed machine gun from a fallen Humvee, her hands shaking slightly as she cleared it. Every action was deliberate, every decision focused entirely on survival. The first round tore into the enemy position, forcing them to retreat momentarily. Jessica's pulse pounded in her ears, but she remained focused, scanning for threats and anticipating movement. This was no longer training. This was survival, strategy, and courage in its purest form. "Cole, cover the rear. Rivera, support the left flank." Jessica barked, gesturing sharply. Her commands, once hesitant whispers in a training room, now resonated with authority. The survivors obeyed, relying on the clarity of her mind and the certainty of her instincts. Jessica moved swiftly between cover points, ensuring each soldier was positioned optimally. Her eyes flicked from ridge to ridge, noting the rhythm of the enemy fire, their pauses and gaps. Timing was now everything. A sudden explosion erupted nearby, sending a shower of gravel and smoke across the creek bed. Jessica's body tensed instinctively, but she did not flinch. She pressed on, analyzing, planning, and adapting. The ambush was well coordinated. The attackers had numbers, positioning, and firepower. But Jessica had something they did not: decisiveness under pressure. She realized that if they were to survive, they could not merely hold their positions. They needed to fight back strategically, using the enemy's expectations against them. Her mind raced. The enemy was using the valley to channel their movements, focusing fire on narrow areas to maximize damage. If Jessica could create diversions, isolate groups, and control key vantage points, they could disrupt the attack entirely. She instructed her team to lay down intermittent fire, retreating strategically between positions. Each movement was calculated, reducing exposure while increasing the enemy's vulnerability. Slowly, the balance began to shift. As Jessica moved forward, she noticed a ridge to the right, lightly covered but crucial for observation. Crawling across open ground under intermittent fire, she reached it, setting up a position that allowed her to survey the battlefield. From this vantage point, she identified the command node, a small outpost with radios coordinating the attack. Her pulse raced, but her decision was immediate. Neutralizing this node could end the ambush, or at least create the confusion they desperately needed. She turned her attention back to the survivors, signaling them to hold their ground and maintain suppression. Then, focusing entirely on the ridge, Jessica targeted the enemy fighters, firing with precision. Every shot counted. Each suppression allowed the rest of the convoy to inch forward toward safety. She felt the adrenaline coursing through her, but the fear that had gripped her at the start of the ambush had transformed into acute focus. She was no longer just a trainee, she was the pivot on which the survival of the convoy depended. Moments later, a soldier beside her groaned, struck by a ricochet. Jessica reacted instantly, dragging him to cover while continuing to provide suppressive fire. The valley had become a brutal classroom, teaching lessons in pain, resilience, and courage. Every decision she made was tested by fire, every movement challenged by reality. And with every successful maneuver, she gained a quiet confidence, a realization that she was capable of far more than she had ever imagined. The enemy, disoriented by the unexpected countermeasures, began to falter. Small groups retreated, their coordinated rhythm broken. Jessica seized the opportunity, coordinating flanking maneuvers that pushed the attackers back. She used smoke grenades to obscure visibility, forcing the enemy to hesitate while the survivors moved closer to relative safety. Her tactical mind, combined with instinct honed under fire, allowed her to turn the tables. The trainee who had been underestimated was now orchestrating the defense of her team. Through it all, Jessica's mind remained alert to the psychological weight of command. She encouraged each soldier, directing them with calm authority, masking the exhaustion and fear that coursed through her body. In that moment, leadership was more than giving orders. It was embodying the resolve and courage necessary to inspire others to survive. The team began to respond, coordinating in ways that were impossible without her guidance. As the sun climbed higher, casting blinding light across the valley, Jessica realized that they had bought themselves a critical advantage. The ambush, once a near-certain disaster, had been disrupted. The enemy's formations were disorganized, their fire less coordinated. And yet, the battle was far from over. The command node remained, the threat above and around them persisted, and the valley still held deadly traps at every turn. Jessica allowed herself a brief moment to breathe, scanning the ridges and surveying her team. Each soldier was battered but alive. Cole, impressed and weary, offered a nod of acknowledgement. Rivera gave a small, grim smile, silently conveying pride. And Jessica, despite the weight of responsibility pressing down on her, felt a surge of clarity. She had acted decisively, with courage and intellect. She had taken command when no one else could. The next move was clear in her mind: neutralize the enemy's command position. Only then could the convoy truly be safe. And Jessica Monroe, the trainee who had arrived in the valley underestimated and overlooked, was about to take the fight to the enemy. She was no longer just surviving. She was leading. The valley had fallen into a tense, eerie lull. The smoke and dust hung heavy, masking the battlefield and cloaking Jessica Monroe in a veil of grim determination. The initial chaos of the ambush had been weathered. The survivors, bruised and battered, had found a measure of cover in a shallow creek bed. Their breaths came in ragged gasps, hearts hammering in unison with the distant echoes of gunfire. Jessica's body ached from the crawling, the dodging, the adrenaline-fueled exertion, yet there was no time for rest. Not now. The battle was far from over. Her mind raced as she surveyed the valley. From her vantage point, she could see the enemy regrouping on the ridges above. The ambush, initially executed with precision and coordination, now appeared fragmented. The attacker's confidence had been shaken by her decisive suppression and the calculated movements of her team. Jessica knew the critical next step: the command post. Somewhere along the ridge, a radio team was orchestrating the attack. Destroying it could disrupt the ambush entirely, turning the tide in their favor. Jessica inhaled deeply, centering herself. Every drill, every tactical maneuver she had memorized, converged in her mind. She calculated the angle, the cover, the distance. Her pulse raced, not with fear this time, but with a sharp, focused clarity. She looked at her team: Cole, grimacing but alert; Rivera, tense yet ready; and the other survivors, eyes wide but attentive. "Stay here and suppress them," she instructed, pointing to key cover points. "I'm going in." Crawling across the rocky terrain under intermittent enemy fire, Jessica pressed forward. Each movement was deliberate, low to the ground, body weaving with the rhythm of bullets. She could feel the heat of the sun, the sting of grit in her eyes, the vibration of the distant explosions, but her focus remained razor-sharp. She moved silently between rocks, debris, and fallen vehicles, mapping enemy positions and anticipating their reactions. Every instinct screamed caution, but she knew hesitation could be fatal. The ridge loomed closer. From her hiding place, she observed a small group of fighters near a camouflaged outpost, a radio team coordinating fire. She estimated their numbers, positions, and rotations. Timing would be everything. Jessica gritted her teeth and readied her rifle. She calculated her path to minimize exposure, then darted from cover to cover, each movement precise, each breath measured. Her hands shook slightly, not from fear, but from the raw intensity of the moment. She reached the edge of the outpost, heart pounding like a war drum. The enemy hadn't noticed her yet. With a calm she barely recognized in herself, Jessica took aim. One shot, then another, neutralized the sentries without alerting the others. She moved swiftly, each step deliberate, methodical. She could hear distant shouts as the remaining enemy scrambled, confused by the sudden silence from their command point. Jessica seized the opportunity, crawling to the radio itself. Her fingers worked quickly, shutting down transmissions, sending false signals, and scrambling enemy coordination. The ambush's rhythm collapsed. Confusion rippled through the attackers. Gunfire became sporadic, uncoordinated. Jessica watched as the enemy faltered, disoriented by the sudden loss of communication. She signaled back to her team, guiding them forward, coordinating suppressive fire to keep the enemy pinned. The survivors moved with her, inspired by the decisive action of the trainee who had become their anchor in the chaos. Adrenaline surged as Jessica took a moment to assess the battlefield. From her position, she could see the valley more clearly, now that the smoke had begun to thin. Enemy fighters were retreating, regrouping, but their advantage had evaporated. Using the terrain, Jessica marked key targets with flares, directing fire and guiding her team's advance. Every action she took was calculated, deliberate, and precise. The once overwhelming ambush now appeared vulnerable, fractured by her ingenuity and courage. But Jessica knew better than to assume victory. The enemy still had numbers, and they still had the advantage of higher ground. She spotted movement, a small group attempting to flank her team from the left ridge. Without hesitation, she aimed and fired, forcing them to duck for cover. Rivera followed, and together they unleashed suppressive fire, buying critical seconds for the convoy survivors to advance. Jessica's mind remained sharp, tracking every enemy movement, calculating every risk. A sudden blast from a grenade rocked the ridge near her position, throwing debris into the air. Jessica rolled instinctively, taking cover behind a jagged rock. The shockwave rattled her, but she quickly assessed the new threat. The enemy was disorganized, yet they were still dangerous. She adjusted her aim, taking out 2 more fighters attempting to re-establish firing positions. The rhythm of the valley had changed, and she was now dictating it. From the creek bed below, her team responded to her signals with precision. Suppression fire, tactical retreats, and coordinated movements allowed the convoy to inch forward, each step closer to safety. Jessica's voice rang out, steady and commanding, guiding them, bolstering their resolve. The battlefield, once a place of terror and chaos, was now a controlled environment under her direction. Her fear had transformed into power, her instinct into authority. As the enemy continued to falter, Jessica spotted an opportunity to strike decisively. A small group of insurgents had gathered near a supply cache, intending to regroup and reinforce their attack. With a deep breath, she leapt from cover, firing as she moved, a blur of motion and determination. Her team followed her signals, converging on the position. In moments, the enemy was pinned, their advance halted. The tide had shifted completely. The ambush was no longer in control. Jessica allowed herself a brief glance around the valley. Smoke curled lazily from overturned vehicles. Dust rose in spirals from the rocky ground, and the sun blazed overhead. Her team, battered but alive, began to regroup, their trust in her solidifying. Sergeant Cole, still wounded, nodded in astonishment and respect. Rivera offered a brief, tight-lipped smile, and Jessica, panting and exhausted, realized the magnitude of what she had achieved. The trainee had transformed the ambush from a potential massacre into a controlled, manageable battlefield. But even in victory, she remained vigilant. The enemy was not yet defeated. Reinforcements could arrive, and the terrain still offered countless threats. Jessica knew that the next phase, controlling the battlefield, securing communication, and preparing for potential follow-up attacks, would be critical. Yet for the first time, she felt a surge of confidence, a realization that she was capable of far more than anyone, including herself, had imagined. Every shot, every movement, every command had counted. Every life in the valley now owed a debt to her courage, to her swift decisions, and to her unwavering focus. She had acted decisively, fearlessly, and with a clarity that had saved lives. And as she took a moment to breathe, she allowed herself a single thought. This was only the beginning. The battle had turned, and she had emerged as the force capable of dictating its outcome. The valley was no longer alive with the roar of coordinated enemy fire, but neither was it completely silent. Smoke still spiraled from overturned Humvees. Dust drifted lazily across the rocks, and the acrid stench of gunpowder hung thick in the air. Every sound was amplified: the creak of metal, the rasp of exhausted breaths, the distant groan of wounded soldiers. Jessica Monroe crouched behind a shattered vehicle, her rifle at the ready, eyes scanning the ridges above. For a fleeting moment, the valley felt suspended in time, a fragile balance between life and death. She allowed herself a quick assessment. The enemy had been thrown into confusion, their command node destroyed, their formations disrupted. The remaining attackers were disorganized, cautious, and hesitant to advance. Her team had regrouped in the shallow creek bed, shaking, bruised, and exhausted, yet alive. Sergeant Cole, leaning against a boulder with his field dressing bloodied but secure, gave her a nod of respect and gratitude. Rivera wiped sweat and grime from his forehead and gave a faint, acknowledging smile. And the other survivors, still in shock, looked to her with wide eyes, realizing that it was the rookie who had pulled them through the chaos. Jessica took a steadying breath, allowing herself the tiniest hint of relief. But the danger was not yet gone. In the back of her mind, she knew the enemy could still regroup or receive reinforcements from nearby positions. Every instinct screamed vigilance. Every muscle remained coiled like a spring. Her eyes flicked across the valley floor, noting debris, cover points, and potential escape routes. Every survivor in the creek bed depended on her guidance, her decisions, and her ability to anticipate the next move. She moved among them, checking wounds and giving instructions. Keep your heads down. Stay low. Don't move until I signal. We're not out of danger yet. Her voice, calm and precise, cut through the tension. The survivors obeyed without hesitation. For the first time, they weren't just reacting. They were coordinated, directed by a mind sharper than the chaos surrounding them. Jessica felt the weight of command heavy on her shoulders, heavier than the heat of the desert sun, heavier than any physical burden she had ever carried. Sergeant Cole, now steady enough to move, leaned closer. You did it, Monroe. You actually did it, he said, voice hoarse with disbelief and exhaustion. Jessica didn't respond, only nodded, scanning the ridges. She couldn't afford to relax, not yet. The valley was still dangerous, and one misstep could undo everything they had achieved. She moved to a higher vantage point, using the partial cover of rocks and smoke to survey the battlefield. From here, the chaos of moments before seemed almost unreal. Bodies, both enemy and allied, littered the terrain. Vehicles smoldered in unnatural angles, and dust spiraled endlessly into the sky. The enemy's movements were now sporadic, uncoordinated. Small groups attempted to find cover, but their fire was erratic, inefficient, and easily suppressed. Jessica signaled to her team, directing fire in measured bursts to keep the remaining threats pinned. Each command was deliberate, each movement calculated. The valley, once a perfect trap, was now under her indirect control. The ambush had lost its rhythm, and the initiative had shifted entirely. Her gaze fell on a group of enemy fighters attempting a final, desperate push toward the creek bed. Jessica's hands shook slightly, but her resolve remained unbroken. She took aim, her rifle steady despite exhaustion, and fired with precision, each shot forcing them back. Rivera followed her lead, covering the left flank, while Cole managed the rear. The survivors moved as one, each step coordinated, each action purposeful. Jessica realized that the valley had changed beneath their feet, not just in the immediate tactical sense, but in spirit. Fear had been replaced by controlled determination. Minutes stretched like hours. The sun blazed overhead, casting harsh light over the battlefield. Smoke curled and drifted, obscuring vision but also masking their movements. Jessica continued to direct her team, moving between cover points, ensuring that everyone remained positioned for both defense and survival. Her body screamed in protest, muscles aching, wounds and bruises burning. But her mind remained clear, focused, and unyielding. The ambush that had begun as a nightmare was slowly unraveling in their favor. Then came a moment of eerie quiet. The distant explosions had ceased, the sporadic gunfire slowed to a trickle. Jessica allowed herself a careful scan of the ridges. The remaining enemy fighters had either retreated or been neutralized. The valley, which had moments ago been a deadly trap, was now eerily still. Her heart, still racing from adrenaline, began to slow slightly. The immediate threat was over. She moved toward her team, checking each soldier. Cole winced but smiled faintly, murmuring, "You saved us." Rivera gave her a nod of acknowledgement, pride and respect clear in his expression. The other survivors, exhausted and shaken, began to understand the truth. The trainee they had underestimated, the rookie they had dismissed, had not only kept them alive, but had orchestrated their survival under impossible circumstances. Jessica allowed herself a small, exhausted smile. She had faced the abyss and emerged intact. Even in the quiet aftermath, the lessons of the ambush were clear. Every soldier in the valley owed their survival to focus, discipline, and courage under pressure. Jessica's role had been pivotal, but she also recognized the resilience of her team. Each person had contributed in small ways, covering fire, following instructions, staying calm, and collectively they had survived. She moved among them, reinforcing their accomplishments, ensuring that the moment of survival became a shared triumph, not just her own. Her eyes scanned the horizon once more. The sun had climbed high, casting long shadows over the rocky terrain. Smoke from destroyed vehicles rose lazily, painting the valley in shades of gray and ochre. Jessica realized the full weight of what had occurred. Lives had been saved, but the scars, both physical and emotional, would linger. The valley had tested every ounce of her training, every instinct honed at Fort Benning, and she had passed. She had not only survived, but had commanded, adapted, and prevailed. As reinforcements approached in the distance, helicopters and armored vehicles, responding to the radio signals she had manipulated, the survivors began to breathe easier. Jessica, crouched behind a rock, allowed herself the smallest moment of reflection. The ambush had been catastrophic, but through courage, skill, and quick thinking, disaster had been averted. Her role as the trainee had shifted irrevocably. She was no longer just a rookie. She was a leader, a decisive force capable of shaping outcomes in the most dire circumstances. Cole approached, leaning heavily on his rifle, and offered a faint, awed smile. "I don't know how you did it," he said, voice hoarse but sincere. Jessica shook her head slightly, allowing herself a small laugh. "I don't know either," she admitted. "I just did what had to be done." Rivera clapped her on the shoulder. "That's what heroes do," he said quietly. Jessica didn't reply, only scanning the valley one last time, ensuring that no lingering threats remained. The valley had gone silent, the echoes of battle fading into memory. The ambush, once a perfect trap, had been undone by a single trainee's courage and clarity. Jessica Monroe, underestimated, overlooked, and dismissed, had transformed a potential massacre into a hard-won victory. Her team survived, battered but alive, because of her decisiveness, skill, and unwavering determination. And as the helicopters approached, casting shadows across the valley, Jessica finally allowed herself a deep breath. The silence was not just a lull between chaos. It was a testament to survival, resilience, and the extraordinary strength of someone who had refused to yield, even when everything seemed lost. The valley, once alive with gunfire and chaos, had grown eerily quiet. Dust hung in the air like a heavy curtain, spiraling lazily from the disturbed earth, carrying the lingering scent of smoke and burnt metal. Overturned Humvees and debris from the ambush littered the ground, stark reminders of the battle that had just taken place. For Jessica Monroe, the intensity of the fight had not yet fully faded. Every nerve in her body still vibrated with the adrenaline that had carried her through the ambush. She crouched behind a shattered vehicle, rifle slung loosely across her shoulder, surveying the valley with sharp, calculating eyes. Her team had regrouped in the shallow creek bed, battered, exhausted, and shaken, but alive. Sergeant Cole, leaning against a rock with his wound dressed and bandaged, gave her a nod of respect that carried more weight than any medal. Rivera, grimy and bloodied, quietly checked the remaining soldiers, making sure no one was critically injured. And the other survivors, who had once doubted the rookie among them, now looked at Jessica with a mix of awe, gratitude, and disbelief. She had done the impossible, led them to safety, organized survival, and taken decisive action when everyone else hesitated. Medical helicopters descended, their rotors chopping the air above and stirring clouds of dust. Medics moved swiftly, tending to the wounded and evacuating those who required immediate attention. Jessica watched them go, ensuring that each member of her team received care. Despite her exhaustion, she refused to sit idly. She moved among her soldiers, offering encouragement, directing minor adjustments in position, and keeping a watchful eye on the ridges to make sure no lingering threats remained. Every step reinforced her authority, the quiet strength that had emerged in the heat of battle. As the valley began to empty of danger, Jessica allowed herself a moment to reflect. The ambush had been sudden, lethal, and meticulously executed by the enemy. If not for her decisiveness and the bravery of her team, the outcome could have been catastrophic. She thought of the moments when fear had threatened to paralyze her, when every instinct screamed to duck and wait, and she marveled at the clarity that had cut through the panic. Every decision had been a gamble, every movement a calculated risk. And yet they had survived. When the helicopters lifted off, ferrying the wounded to safety, the survivors gathered near the base perimeter. Officers arrived, their expressions a mixture of relief, curiosity, and professional scrutiny. Jessica was summoned to a debriefing room, where she recounted every detail of the ambush with precision. She described the sequence of enemy movements, the strategies employed, and the decisions she had made to protect her team. Every question was answered with calm clarity, a stark contrast to the chaos she had endured mere hours before. The officers were visibly impressed, noting her tactical awareness, composure, and leadership under fire. News of Jessica's actions spread quickly through the base. Fellow soldiers, previously unaware of the rookie's capabilities, approached her with congratulations and admiration. Some were hesitant, unsure how to express their respect, while others were direct and emphatic, praising her courage and quick thinking. Sergeant Cole offered a rare smile, acknowledging her skill with a few quiet words. Rivera, usually reserved, clapped her on the shoulder with pride. Jessica accepted their recognition with humility, focusing on the fact that survival had been a team effort, not a solo achievement. The formal recognition process began swiftly. Reports were filed, detailing her actions, the tactical decisions that saved lives, and the disruption of the ambush. Commanding officers recommended her for commendation, citing extraordinary bravery, tactical proficiency, and leadership that far exceeded her rank and experience. Jessica's story reached beyond the immediate unit, drawing attention from higher command. Her heroism became a subject of study, an example of how training, quick thinking, and courage could alter the course of a seemingly hopeless situation. Despite the accolades, the emotional toll weighed heavily. Jessica took time to sit alone, reflecting on the lives saved and the lives lost. Every fallen enemy fighter and the wounded soldiers etched themselves into her memory. She realized that leadership was not measured solely by recognition or medals, but by responsibility, the relentless accountability for the safety and survival of others. The valley had been a crucible, revealing the depths of her courage, her capacity for decisive action, and the strength she drew from trusting herself and her team. In the days that followed, Jessica participated in interviews and briefings, detailing the ambush for historical records and training purposes. Her insights were invaluable, providing lessons in situational awareness, command under pressure, and adaptive leadership. Fellow trainees and soldiers looked to her as a model, inspired not just by her bravery, but by her ability to act decisively when every instinct screamed hesitation. She became a mentor figure, quietly imparting knowledge while demonstrating the importance of calm, deliberate decision-making. Jessica's story reached the broader military community, celebrated as an example of courage and initiative. Stories circulated highlighting her transformation from underestimated rookie to battlefield leader. Media outlets, military publications, and base communications praised her actions, emphasizing the combination of bravery, skill, and intelligence that had saved lives. Yet for Jessica, the true reward lay not in recognition, but in knowing that her decisions had protected her team and prevented a massacre. The ambush also prompted reflection within the military hierarchy. Commanders studied the incident, recognizing gaps in communication and the need for decentralized decision-making. Jessica's example underscored the importance of empowering soldiers at every level to act decisively and take initiative when the situation demanded it. Her heroism had tangible effects beyond the battlefield, influencing training, strategy, and the culture of leadership. As the weeks passed, Jessica continued her service with renewed confidence and purpose. She trained alongside fellow soldiers, sharing her experiences, emphasizing the lessons learned in the valley. The camaraderie of her team deepened, forged in the crucible of survival. She had emerged not only as a hero in action, but as a leader in mentorship, proving that courage, intelligence, and composure could inspire others and create lasting impact. Even in quiet moments, Jessica reflected on the ambush with solemn respect for the gravity of the experience. Every decision, every action, had consequences. The chaos of the valley had tested her in ways she had never imagined, yet she had emerged resilient, decisive, and capable. Her journey from rookie to battlefield leader was complete, not through accolades alone, but through the trust earned, lives saved, and the indelible mark left on her team and the military community. The sun had begun its slow descent over the valley, casting long golden shadows across the scarred landscape. The once lethal terrain, littered with overturned Humvees, spent cartridges, and the aftermath of gunfire, now stood as silent testimony to the chaos that had unfolded hours earlier. Helicopters circled above, their rotors kicking up dust and debris as reinforcements secured the area. Jessica Monroe sat on a rock near the creek bed, exhausted, bruised, and streaked with soot and blood, yet her eyes held a quiet clarity. The battle was over, but its reverberations would echo far beyond this valley. Sergeant Cole, leaning on Rivera for support, approached her cautiously. His expression, once gruff and incredulous, was now filled with awe. "Monroe, I don't know what to say," he muttered, voice hoarse from shouting and adrenaline. You saved all of us. You didn't just survive, you led." Jessica shook her head, a tired smile crossing her face. She was no longer the trainee who had hesitated to speak, the rookie ignored by her peers. She had faced chaos, made split-second decisions under fire, and emerged as the lifeline for her entire team. The soldiers gathered around, some still catching their breath, others helping the wounded, and all casting glances at Jessica that conveyed respect, admiration, and disbelief. Rivera stepped forward, placing a steady hand on her shoulder. "You kept us alive. Every move, every shot, it was perfect," he said quietly. Jessica allowed herself a small nod. She felt a surge of emotion, a mixture of relief, pride, and the lingering intensity of the battle. Her body ached, her mind raced, but there was also a profound sense of accomplishment. Soon helicopters descended, landing near the edge of the valley. Medical personnel moved swiftly to tend to the wounded, medics shouting orders and assessing injuries. Jessica's team, now stabilized, prepared to be extracted. She glanced one last time across the battlefield. The ridges that had once held deadly snipers and ambushers now stood empty and silent, their threat neutralized. The chaos had passed, leaving a valley marked by resilience, strategy, and courage. Back at base, the atmosphere was a mix of relief, celebration, and sober reflection. Jessica, still wearing her blood-stained uniform, was surrounded by her team, officers, and fellow trainees who had come to witness the return of the convoy. Word of her actions had already begun to spread, how a rookie, underestimated and overlooked, had not only survived an ambush, but had led her team to safety against overwhelming odds. Officers, normally reserved and stern, offered nods of approval, and whispers of admiration filled the room. A formal debriefing followed. Jessica recounted the events with meticulous detail, describing every decision, every movement, and every critical observation. Her clear, concise account impressed the officers, illustrating not only her bravery, but also her analytical thinking under extreme pressure. Questions came rapidly, about enemy positions, timing, and strategy. Jessica answered each without hesitation, her confidence now tempered by the gravity of what had occurred. She had proven, beyond doubt, that courage alone was not enough. Precision, calculation, and leadership were equally essential. Awards and commendations followed in the days after. Jessica was lauded for extraordinary bravery, her name appearing in official reports and military communications. Medals were pinned to her uniform, her actions recognized not just by her unit, but by the larger military community. Yet, despite the accolades, she remained grounded. She did not seek recognition. Her focus had always been on survival, on keeping her team alive, on fulfilling the responsibility thrust upon her in the heat of battle. Still, the acknowledgement was deeply meaningful, a tangible recognition of her courage, skill, and leadership. The impact of her actions extended beyond the military. News outlets, both national and international, reported on the convoy and the unlikely heroism of the young trainee. Stories highlighted her decisiveness, her courage under fire, and her ability to transform chaos into strategy. Interviews with fellow soldiers painted a vivid picture, the rookie who had become a leader in a matter of minutes, the one who saved lives when others were paralyzed by fear. Jessica's story resonated widely, inspiring admiration, respect, and even hope. Yet, amid the praise and recognition, Jessica remained reflective. She knew the cost of the battle, the physical scars, the emotional toll, and the lives forever changed. Each soldier she had protected carried the memory of the ambush, the adrenaline, the fear, and the relief. And though she had emerged as a leader, she understood that leadership came not from accolades, but from responsibility, the relentless, often terrifying commitment to the lives of those in her care. In the months that followed, Jessica continued her service, her reputation now well established. Her peers, once dismissive, now sought her advice and guidance. She became a mentor, quietly sharing her knowledge, experience, and insight with trainees and soldiers alike. The lessons she had learned in that valley observation, decisiveness, courage under pressure, and the power of quiet leadership became tools she imparted to others, ensuring that her experience could save even more lives in the future. Jessica's story also inspired changes within her unit. Commanders took note of the importance of listening to all voices, of recognizing talent and initiative regardless of rank or experience. The ambush had revealed systemic gaps in communication and decision-making, and Jessica's actions highlighted the value of decisive leadership, situational awareness, and adaptive thinking. Her courage had not only saved lives, but had reshaped how the military approached training, leadership, and teamwork. Years later, when asked about the ambush and her role in it, Jessica remained humble. She spoke of the team, of the shared courage, and of the instinct that drove her to act when others hesitated. "I didn't do it alone," she would say. "Every one of us contributed. Every decision, every movement, every action mattered. I was just the one in the position to make them, and we survived because we trusted each other." Her words, simple yet profound, captured the essence of what true leadership and heroism meant. The valley itself became a symbol, a reminder of what courage, skill, and decisiveness could achieve under unimaginable pressure. For Jessica Monroe, it was the defining moment of her early career, the point at which a trainee became a leader, a survivor became a hero, and chaos was transformed into order through bravery and intelligence. She carried the lessons with her for the rest of her life, a constant reminder that in the most desperate moments, courage combined with clarity could save lives and even change the course of history. And so, the story of Jessica Monroe ended not in the dust and smoke of that Afghan valley, but in the hearts of those she saved, the respect of those she inspired, and the legacy of a young soldier who refused to be underestimated. The rookie who had walked into a deadly ambush emerged as a hero, a leader, and an enduring symbol of courage in the face of overwhelming odds.